Today I'm going to tell you the story of a brave nurse who risked everything during America's bloodiest conflict. Elizabeth Blackwell smuggled crucial messages between Union and Confederate lines while tending to the wounded of both armies. Of a war, the truth was more shocking. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening from. Elizabeth Blackwell's hands trembled as she folded the letter and slipped it beneath the false bottom of her medical. Outside the field hospital tent, cannon fire rumbled in the distance, a constant reminder of the nation tearing itself apart. 3 months into the war, and already the casualties overwhelmed every medical facility from Pennsylvania to Georgia. Nurse Blackwell, Dr. Hammond's voice cut through her thoughts. "We need you in surgery now." She tucked a stray lock of chestnut hair beneath her cap and hurried toward the operating tent. The stench hit her first, blood mixed with chloroform and the sickly sweet smell of gangrene. On the table lay a young Union soldier, barely 18, his blue uniform soaked crimson from a bullet wound to the shoulder. "Hold him steady," Dr. Hammond ordered as he prepared to extract the bullet. Elizabeth pressed down on the boy's good shoulder, meeting his terrified, "What's your name?" "Thomas," he whispered. "Thomas Miller from Ohio." "Well, Thomas from Ohio, I need you to be brave for a few more minutes. Can you do that?" He nodded weakly as Dr. Hammond began probing the wound. The boy's scream pierced the air before he mercifully passed out. 2 hours and 3 surgeries later, Elizabeth stepped outside, gulping fresh air to clear her head. The setting sun cast long shadows the field hospital outside Manassas Junction, Virginia. Just 2 days ago, the first major battle of the war had erupted here. The Union forces had retreated in disarray, leaving behind hundreds of wounded. She glanced down at her apron, once white, now stained with American blood, Northern and Southern alike. As a nurse trained in Philadelphia but with family in Richmond, Elizabeth occupied a precarious position. When war broke out in April, she had been visiting her sister in Virginia. Rather than flee north, she volunteered her medical skills where they were desperately needed. "Excuse me, ma'am." Elizabeth turned to find a Confederate officer watching her suspicious. "Captain Monroe," she acknowledged. "How may I help you?" "I understand you're crossing lines tomorrow with the medical supply wagon." His southern accent drawled through the words. "That's correct. Dr. Hammond needs additional chloroform and bandages from the Union Medical Corps." The captain stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have a letter for my brother in Washington. He's with the War Department." He hesitated. "We haven't spoken since Fort Sumter, but our mother is gravely ill in Baltimore." Elizabeth felt the weight of the other letter already hidden in her bag, a message from a Union colonel to his wife, trapped in Richmond. This wasn't the first time she'd been asked to carry personal correspondence. The medical flag offered rare protection to cross between warring sides. "I cannot carry military information," she said firmly. "It's personal. I swear on my honor." He produced a sealed, "Just news of family." Against her better judgment, Elizabeth accepted it. "I'll try to have it delivered." After the captain left, she retreated to her small tent and carefully examined the letter in the lantern light, looking for any signs it had been tampered with or might contain military intelligence. Satisfied it was likely personal as claimed, she added it to her hidden compartment. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, quickly covering her medical bag with a shawl. Sarah Jenkins, another nurse, poked her head inside. "Lizzie, you've hardly eaten all day." "I saved you stew." Elizabeth accepted the bowl gratefully. At 28, she was older than many of the nurses who had volunteered when war fever swept both North and South. Her medical training under her physician father had given her skills women lacked. "You're crossing over tomorrow?" Sarah asked, sitting on the edge of the cot. Elizabeth nodded. "Just for supplies." "Be careful. There's talk of spies everywhere." Sarah's voice dropped. "They hanged a man yesterday behind the Confederate lines. Said he was passing information." A chill ran through Elizabeth that had nothing to do with the evening air. "I'm just a nurse, Sarah. A nurse who moves between armies." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Promise me you'll be careful." Later that night, as crickets chirped outside her tent, Elizabeth lay awake staring at the canvas above. She had never intended to become a courier of secret messages. It began innocently, a soldier asking her to tell his brother in the opposite army that he was alive, a mother desperate for news of her son. But with each crossing, more people approached. The letters were mostly personal, yet she couldn't be certain some didn't contain valuable information. She told herself she was providing comfort to divided families, nothing more. Dawn arrived with a heavy mist clinging to the ground. Elizabeth dressed quickly in her gray traveling dress, deliberately neither blue nor gray, and pinned the Red Cross armband that identified her as medical personnel. Outside, 2 wagons were being prepared for the journey to the Union lines 10 miles away. "Remember, you have until sundown," reminded her as she climbed onto the first wagon. "The Union commanders have guaranteed safe passage, but don't test their patience." The journey through the scarred Virginia countryside passed in tense silence. Farms lay abandoned, crops withering in the summer heat. Twice they passed bodies not yet recovered from the recent battle, bloated and unrecognizable in death. At the Union checkpoint, Elizabeth produced her medical. The young lieutenant barely glanced at her, waving her through. The ease of her crossing always, as if the Red Cross armband created an invisible shield. The Union Field Hospital bustled with activity. She recognized Dr. Ellsworth from medical conferences before the war. "Elizabeth, thank God you've come." He embraced her briefly. "We've just received hundreds of wounded from Manassas. Every supply is critically low." While the wagons were being loaded with precious medical supplies, Elizabeth slipped away to find a private. Behind a supply tent, she carefully removed the Confederate captains. Now came the difficult part, finding someone to deliver it to Washington. "Nurse Blackwell?" A voice startled her. Elizabeth whirled around to find a Union colonel watching her with narrow eyes. "Colonel Barrett," she greeted him, quickly tucking the letter into her. "A moment of your time." He led her to a small tent set apart from the others. Inside, maps covered a makeshift table. "I understand you cross between lines regularly," he said without "For medical supplies only, Colonel." He studied her face. "Your loyalty, Nurse Blackwell, where does it lie? With the Union, Confederacy?" The question she dreaded most. "My loyalty is to the wounded, sir. North or South, they bleed the same." He seemed unsatisfied with her answer. "I have information that must reach one of our operatives in Richmond. Medical personnel are the only ones who can move freely." Elizabeth felt her heart pound against her ribs. "You're asking me to spy, Colonel. I'm asking you to serve your country." He lowered his voice. "Unless your sympathies lie elsewhere." "I have family in both North and South," she answered carefully, "as do many Americans, yet they've chosen sides." He produced a folded paper. "This contains no military intelligence that could cost lives. It's simply a recognition signal for our agent." Elizabeth thought of the letters already hidden in her bag. If discovered carrying messages for both sides, neither would show mercy. "And if I refuse," expression hardened, "then perhaps your movements between lines deserve greater scrutiny." It was a clear threat. Elizabeth knew her medical work would be jeopardized. She couldn't travel freely. Just this, accepting the paper with a steady hand that belied her inner turmoil. As she returned to the wagons, now loaded with supplies, Elizabeth felt the weight of both sides' expectations pressing down upon her. She had become what she'd always feared, a pawn in this terrible war, caught between conflicting loyalties. The sun was beginning its descent. As they approached the Confederate lines once more, Elizabeth touched the hidden compartment in her bag, now containing messages from both North and South. With each crossing, the risk grew. How long before someone took a dangerous game? And when they did, which side would claim her life? The North, Confederate sympathizer, or the South as a Union? As the checkpoint came into view, Elizabeth straightened her spine and arranged her face into the neutral expression of a dedicated, concerned only with the welfare. But beneath that mask, a storm of fear and doubt raged. She had entered a world of shadows and secret, where trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. For 3 weeks, Elizabeth continued her dangerous dance between the lines. Each crossing grew more perilous as suspicions deepened on both sides. September brought cooler air to Virginia, but no respite from the bloodshed. "You're being watched." As they sorted bandages outside the Confederate, a man was asking questions about your Elizabeth's fingers stilled on the linen strip she was rolling. Kind of question. "Who you speak to in the Union camp. Whether you spend more time." Sarah glanced nervous. "I don't." That night, Elizabeth, the hidden compartment in her medical bag, 4 messages, 2 from Confederate office and 2 from Union officials. What had begun as innocent family correspondence had evolved into something far more dangerous. Colonel Barrett's recognition signal had been only the beginning. Now both sides pressed her to carry information, each believing she sympathized. Dawn broke with the distant thunder of artillery, a skirmish somewhere to the west. Elizabeth dressed quickly, pinning her nurse's cap securely. Today she wasn't scheduled to cross lines, which brought momentary relief. The hospital tents overflowed with wounded from yesterday's fighting. Elizabeth worked methodically, changing dressings and administering precious morphine to those in greatest pain. Around noon, she noticed Captain Monroe watching her from across the tent. "Nurse Blackwell," he approached. She finished with the patient. "A word, please." He led her outside, away from listening ears. "My brother received my letter. I'm grateful." Elizabeth nodded, careful to keep her expression. "I'm glad I could." He sent a reply. The captain produced an envelope. "Would you deliver it when you next cross?" Before she could answer, a commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. A rider galloped toward the command tent, his horse lathered with sweat. Within minutes, officers were shouting orders, and soldiers scrambled to form defensive lines. "Union forces approaching from the north," Captain Monroe explained. "Suddenly all business. We're evacuating the hospital." Elizabeth hurried back to the medical. "Prepare the wounded for transport," Dr. Joe Hammond ordered. "Anyone who can't travel," his gaze hardened, "make them comfortable." The implication was clear. The severely wounded would be left behind. Elizabeth felt sick, but had no time to dwell on it. She worked frantically, helping load patients onto wagons. "Nurse Blackwell," Dr. Hammond called over the chaos. "You're staying." "Staying?" She couldn't hide her shock. "You're the only one who can work with both sides. When the Union forces arrive, ensure they treat our wounded properly." He pressed a medical into her hand. "Use your neutral status." Before she could protest, he was gone, climbing onto the ladder. Within an hour, the Confederate field hospital had vanished, leaving only the most gravely wounded, with Elizabeth and two young orderlies who were too inexperienced to be of much use. She organized the remaining patients as best she could, giving water to those conscious enough to drink. The sound of approaching troops grew louder. Elizabeth pinned the Red Cross to her arm prominently and stepped outside to meet the Union soldiers. The first blue uniforms appeared through the trees, rifles raised. Elizabeth stood her ground, hands visible. "Medical personnel," she called out. "I have wounded who need attention." A Union lieutenant approached cautious. "Identify yourself." "Elizabeth Blackwell, nurse. I've worked with Dr. Ellsworth in your camp." She produced her papers. "These men need immediate medical assistance." The lieutenant studied her documents, then her face. "You're the nurse who crosses lines." Something in his tone made her uneasy. "I go where I'm needed, Lieutenant." He turned to his men. "Secure the area and search her belongings." "On what grounds?" Elizabeth demanded, heart racing. "Suspicion of espionage, ma'am." Two soldiers brushed past her into the tent where she'd left her medical. Elizabeth followed, protesting. "I'm protected under the medical flag. Those supplies are for the wounded." The soldiers ignored her, upending her bag. Bandages, scissors, and vials of medicine clattered across. One soldier examined the bag carefully, pressing along its edges. Elizabeth held her breath. If they discovered the false bottom. A shout from outside interrupted the search. "Lieutenant, enemy troops to the west." The soldiers dropped the bag and rushed outside. Elizabeth quickly gathered her scattered supplies, hands trembling as she replaced them. The hidden compartment remained undiscovered, but for how long? Gunfire erupted nearby. The tent canvas rippled with the concussion of artillery. Elizabeth turned to her patients, moving the most vulnerable away from the tent walls. "Stay calm," she told them, though her own heart pounded painfully. The battle raged for hours, the tide of fighting surging back the camp. Elizabeth worked through it all, ducking when bullets tore through the canvas, shielding patients with her body when shelling came too close. As dusk fell, an eerie silence descended. Elizabeth ventured outside cautious. Bodies in blue and gray uniforms littered the ground. Neither side had claimed victory, just more dead sons of America. A movement caught her eye, a Confederate soldier dragging himself toward the tree line, leaving a trail of blood. Elizabeth rushed to him, medical instincts overriding caution. "Don't move," she instructed, examining his leg wound. "You'll bleed out." He stared at her with feverish. "They're coming back. Union reinforcement. I need to get you inside." She began fashioning a tourniquet from her apron. The soldier grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "No time. Take this." He pressed a blood-stained paper into her hand. "Get it to General Stewart. Names of Union spies in Richmond." Elizabeth stared at the paper. "I can't." "For the cause," he whispered before his eyes glazed over. She felt for a pulse. Nothing. Another life lost to this senseless. The paper in her hand felt like it was burning through her skin. This wasn't a family letter or a recognition signal. This was explicit military intelligence that could lead to people's deaths. She should destroy it immediately. But before she could decide, horses approached from the north, Union cavalry returning. Elizabeth quickly slipped the paper into her pocket and hurried back to the medical. Colonel Barrett was among the riders. He dismounted, scanning the battlefield before his eyes landed on Elizabeth. "Nurse Blackwell," he approached, removing his gloves. "I'm surprised to find you here." "I stayed with the wounded," she replied evenly, "as was my duty." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed. And did the Confederate officers leave anything behind? Documents, perhaps? Maps?" Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. "Only dying men." Something flickered across his face. Suspicion or respect, she couldn't. "We're establishing a forward camp here. You'll assist our surgeons." "Of course." As he turned to leave, he paused. "Oh, and Nurse Blackwell, my courier was captured last. The one you provided the recognitions." Elizabeth felt cold dread wash up. "Sorry to hear that. Before they hanged him, they tortured him." Barrett's voice was conversational, as if discussing the weather. He didn't break. Others might have. The threat lingered in the air between them. That night, Elizabeth hid in the shadows behind the supply wagon and examined the dead soldier's message by moonlight. The names meant nothing to her, but to Confederate intelligence, they would be invaluable. To Union soldiers, they would be condemning. She thought of Colonel Barrett's thinly veiled threat, of Captain Monroe's trust, of the wounded from both sides depended on her care. Elizabeth made her decision. Taking a match from her pocket, she struck it against a wagon wheel and held the flame to the corner of the paper. She watched the names curled into, floating away on. She had not become a nurse to determine who lived and who died based on the color of their uniform. She would carry no more message for either. But as she turned to go, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. "That was a mistake," Nurse Blackwell voice whispered in her ear. "A very grave mistake." Elizabeth struggled against the iron grip, her scream muffled by the hand across her mouth. She was dragged backward into deeper shadows before being spun around. Captain Monroe's face appeared in the moonlight, expression thunderous. "What did you just burn?" She pushed his hand away. "Let go of me." "Answer me," he hissed, keeping his... "That was Confederate intelligence, wasn't it? I'm a nurse, not a spy. I won't be party to..." Monroe studied her face. "Calculation. So you've been playing both sides, carrying messages for the Union as well." Elizabeth's silence was answer enough. "Do you realize what they'll do?" His grip on her arm loosened. "Either side would hang you without trial." "Then why don't you turn me in?" she challenged. Monroe glanced toward the Union camp. "Because I still need you." He lowered his voice further. "My brother's trapped in Washington. The Union suspects him of Confederate sympathies. I need to get him instructions for escape." "No." Elizabeth pulled away. "Find another courier. There is no one else who can cross lines freely." His eyes hardened. "Besides, Colonel Barrett already suspects you. If I reveal what I know, that's blackmail. That's war." Monroe's voice was flat. "One last message. Then you're free to play Florence Nightingale all you want." Elizabeth felt trapped, the walls of her precarious position closing in. "When?" "Tomorrow. The message will be hidden in a Bible, left side of your medical bag." He relieved. "Don't fail me, Nurse Blackwell." She watched him melt into the darkness, her mind raced. Both sides were using her, threatening her. Each crossing grew more dangerous. But what choice did she? Sleep evaded her that night. By dawn she had made a decision. She would deliver Monroe's message but it would be her final crossing. Afterward she would flee, perhaps to territory far from war. The Union camp stirred to life around. Elizabeth went about her duties mechanically, changing bandages, administering medicine, her thoughts elsewhere. "Nurse Blackwell!" Colonel Barrett's voice startled her. A moment, he led her to his command tent, where maps covered a table, red and blue pins marking troop position. Another officer stood nearby, a major she hadn't seen before. "Major Allen, this is the nurse I mentioned," Barrett said. The major's eyes assessed her coldly. "The one who crosses Confederate lines." Elizabeth felt her pulse quicken. "For medical supplies only." Barrett's. "Of course. That's why I've arranged for you to make another crossing today. Dr. Ellsworth requires additional chloroform." This was unexpected. Elizabeth struggled to keep her expression neutral. "I wasn't aware of a scheduled crossing." "Plans change in war." Barrett gestured to a waiting wagon. "You leave within the hour." Elizabeth recognized the trap taking shape, but could see no way to avoid it. If she refused, she would confirm their suspicions. "As you wish, Colonel." Returning to her tent, she found her medical bag had been moved, searched again most likely. The Bible Monroe had mentioned was there, tucked into the left side. She didn't dare examine it now. The journey to Confederate lines passed in tense silence. Elizabeth sat beside the Union driver, acutely aware of the Bible in her bag and the danger it represented. She had become a chess piece in a game where both sides were willing to sacrifice her. At the checkpoint, Confederate sentries examined her papers more thoroughly than usual. News of the recent battle had heightened security. "Purpose of your visit?" a gray-uniformed sergeant demanded. "Medical supplies," Elizabeth answered, keeping her voice steady. "I have authorization from Dr. Hammond." After a lengthy inspection, they allowed her through. The Confederate Field Hospital had relocated 5 miles south, another delay that heightened her anxiety. When she finally arrived, chaos greeted her. Dozens of new wounded had arrived, overwhelming the medical staff. Dr. Hammond barely acknowledged her presence, gesturing toward a pile of supplies they needed. "We're short everything," he said, not looking up from the amputation he was performing. "Get whatever you can." Elizabeth seized the opportunity amidst the confusion. She slipped behind a supply tent and quickly retrieved the Bible from her bag. A thin envelope was tucked between its pages, Monroe's message to his brother. She hesitated only briefly before making her decision. Taking out a small stub of pencil, she scrawled a note on the envelope's back. "Trap. Flee immediately." If Monroe's brother was innocent, this might save his life. If not, she had at least warned him of danger rather than delivering him blindly to... Elizabeth returned the Bible to her bag and continued gathering the needed supplies. As she worked, a commotion erupted outside. Shouting voices approached the hospital tent. Captain Monroe burst in, his uniform disheveled. His eyes locked on Elizabeth immediately. "Arrest that woman," pointing at her. "She's a Union spy." 2 Confederate soldiers seized her arms before she could react. "What is the meaning of this?" "Search her bag," Monroe ordered, his face contorted with rage. "You'll find Union intelligence hidden there." Dr. Hammond looked between them in confusion. "Captain, Nurse Blackwell has served our wounded faithfully. She's been carrying messages for the Union. We intercepted one of their couriers this morning. He confessed everything." Elizabeth felt the blood drain. Colonel Barrett had set her up perfectly, knowing she would be caught with whatever he had planted in her bag. The soldiers emptied her medical supplies onto a table. One of them examined the bag carefully, finding the hidden compartment she used for months. From it, he withdrew not the Bible, a folded the Union military intelligence, handing it detailed Confederate position. "I've never seen that before." "It was planted!" Monroe's eyes burned with hatred. "First you betrayed your country. Now you attempt to betray me personally." He held up the Bible, opening it to reveal the envelope with her warning scrawled on the back. "Did you think I wouldn't check?" She realized with a sinking heart that she had been outmaneuvered by both. Barrett had used her to deliver false intelligence, while Monroe had used her to confirm his suspicion. "Take her to the stockade," Monroe ordered. "She'll be tried as a spy at dawn." The Confederate prison was little more than a fenced enclosure with a crude shelter. Elizabeth sat alone on the hard ground, her nurse's uniform now filthy and torn. The gravity of her situation settled over her like a spy's. No distinction. As night fell, she heard footsteps. Sarah Jenkins appeared at the fence, her face pale with shock. "Lizzie, what have you done?" "Nothing they're accusing me of," Elizabeth replied, moving closer to the fence. "Sarah, you have to help me. Find Dr. Hammond. Tell him this is a mistake." Sarah shook her head sadly. "He knows. Everyone knows. They found more evidence in your tent. Coded messages, maps of Confederate positions. Those aren't mine. They were planted. The trial is just a formality." Sarah's voice broke. "They're building the gallows already." Elizabeth gripped the rough wood of the fence. "Sarah, please, get word to Colonel Barrett at the Union camp. Tell him." She stopped, realizing futility. Barrett had orchestrated her downfall as surely as Monroe had. Sarah reached through the fence, squeezing Elizabeth's. "I'll try to bring you food before morning." She glanced over her shoulder, nervous. "I have to go." Left alone, Elizabeth against both had used her, then discarded her. Was no longer. Her attempt to maintain neutrality, to help the wounded regardless of uniform, had made her a target for both armies. As midnight approached, rain began to fall, soaking through her thin dress. Elizabeth huddled against the shelter wall, wondering if her family would ever learn her fate. Another nameless casualty of a war that cared nothing for those caught in them. Suddenly a shadow fell across the entrance. Elizabeth tensed, expecting guards. Instead, Thomas Miller stepped into the shelter, the young Union soldier whose shoulder she had helped save after Manassas. Now he wore a Confederate uniform. "Don't scream," he whispered, crouching beside her. "I'm getting you out." "Thomas?" Elizabeth whispered, scarcely believing her eyes. "What are you doing here?" "Repaying a debt," producing a small key. "You saved my life at Manassas." "You're wearing Confederate gray," she noted as he unlocked her shackle. "I'm a scout. I move between lines like you. We don't have much time." They changed guards at midnight. Elizabeth rubbed her raw wrist. "Where can I go? Both sides want me hanged." "North. I have papers that will get you through Union lines to Pennsylvania." He handed her a bundle of clothes. "Put these on." She changed quickly into the simple farm dress and bonnet which would help disguise her identity. Thomas kept watch. "Why are you helping me?" "Because neither side sees what you tried to do. Help everyone, regardless of uniform." He peered into the rainy darkness. "Coast is clear. Follow me." They slipped through a section of fence where Thomas had loosened the boards. The rain provided cover, muffling their footsteps as they crept past sleeping sentries. Elizabeth's heart pounded so loudly she feared it would give them away. At the edge of camp, a horse waited, tethered to a tree. "Take the main road north for 5 miles, then cut east through the woods. There's a Quaker farmhouse, blue door. They'll shelter you until you can travel farther." "What about you?" "I still have work to do here." He pressed something into her hand, a sealed letter. "This explains everything. Who I really am. Who you were working for without knowing it." "I wasn't working for anyone." Thomas smiled sadly. "We all work for someone in this war, whether we choose to or not. Now go." Elizabeth rode through the night, rain plastering her hair. Behind her, shouts. They'd discovered her. The horse seemed to sense the danger, galloping faster without urging. Dawn broke. She reached the Quaker. An elderly man found her collapsed with exhaustion in his barn. "Thee is safe here," he assured her, helping her inside where his wife provided dry clothes and hot. Elizabeth finally examined Thomas's letter. Inside was a note from President Lincoln himself, dated months earlier, appointing her as an unwitting observer behind enemy lines. Thomas had been her handler all along, placing himself near her at Manassas, watching over her. "They used me. All sides use everyone in war," the Quaker woman said gently. "The question is, what thee will do now." Elizabeth stayed with the Quakers for 2 weeks, helping tend their small farm while recovering her strength. News reached them of bloody battles at Antietam Creek, the single deadliest day in American history. Lincoln had used the marginal Union victory to announce his Emancipation Proclamation, changing the war's purpose forever. One night, Elizabeth woke to urgent voices. She crept downstairs to find the Quaker couple speaking with a haggard-looking man in a blood-stained uniform. "Nurse Blackwell?" he gasped upon seeing her. "Thank God!" She recognized him as one of Dr. Hammond's orderlies. "What's happened?" "Field hospital at Sharpsburg. Hundreds wounded, dying. Not enough medical help." He swayed on his feet. "Dr. Hammond sent me to find you. Said you're the only one who can organize proper care." Elizabeth hesitated. Going back meant risking. Yet how could she refuse when wounded men suffered? "I'll need medical." By morning she was riding south again, toward the bloodiest battlefield. The Antietam field hospitals were overwhelmed beyond imagining. Wounded men rose across farm fields, surgeons operating on doors removed from him. Elizabeth found Dr. Hammond elbow-deep in blood, performing his 20th amputation of the day. "You came?" he said, not looking up from his grim work. "I wasn't sure you would." "The wounded need me," I'd simply, already rolling up her sleeve. For 3 days she worked without rest, organizing nurses, prioritizing patients, improvising when supplies ran out. She treated blue and gray uniforms alike, ignoring those who questioned her loyalty. On the 4th day, a familiar face appeared, Colonel Barrett, thinner and more careworn than she remembered. "Nurse Blackwell," he acknowledged. "I'm surprised to find you here." "Are you going to arrest me, Colonel?" asked wearily. He looked around at the hundreds of... "I think there are more pressing concerns than old suspicion." He studied her. "Thomas Miller told me how you refused to pass intelligence that would harm either side. He also told me how you both used me," she countered. Barrett had the grace to look uncomfortable. "War makes criminals of us all, Nurse Black." Before she could respond, Captain Monroe was brought in on a stretcher, his chest bandaged heavily, face gray with pain. Elizabeth went still. "Is he your prisoner?" He's a wounded man, Barrett's. Nothing more. She approached Monroe's stretcher. His eyes widened in recognition, then fear. Come to finish me off? Elizabeth checked his bandages instead. Your wound is infected. You need immediate surgery. Why would you help me after what I did? She met his gaze steadily. Because that's who I am. Not a spy for North or South, but a nurse for all. Later, as Elizabeth washed blood from her hands, she gazed across the field of suffering that stretched before her. The war would rage on for years, suspected. Men would continue dying, was both noble. Her path was clearer now. She would cross the lines one final time, not carrying secret messages, but carrying mercy. Not a double agent, but an agent of healing in a broken nation that would need it long after the last bullet was fired. In choosing to serve life rather than sides, Elizabeth Blackwell had found her true loyalty at last.